Mutrie, and yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And I should mention the distinguished white-haired gentleman to my right there is my friend Ziggy Gudmundsson from Iceland, who is a classmate of mine, and he'll come into my story here at one point. So um, anyway, thanks very much. Happy to be here to share my story. Um, so I'll try and go quick, and then we can ask questions. Lots of time for questions at the end. So I was born in Toronto in 1951 and grew up like a normal kid. I basically spent all my spare time outside, and we happened to live near Lake Ontario, so I was playing on the beaches or in the ravines around there outside all the time. In high school, my best subject was geography, and I used to just pull out the atlas and stare at different maps of far off places and kind of just, I guess that sort of got a travel bug uh, going in me. In 1969, in September, I started in on the planning program at U of W, and I'd learned about it from a family friend. Um, and after, I guess it would be the start of second year, September 1970, it was called Planning 200, which was the ecology class taught by Dr. John Theberge. First minute of that class, a lightning bolt struck me that this is exactly what I want to do the rest of my life, because it applies biology and ecology to real world problems. So that made it easy for me, because after that, I tried to gear whatever I could as far as electives towards that end. So I took courses in geology and anthropology and biology, and I hung out at the ecology lab quite a bit. And then I became aware of a company called EcoPlans, which was started by a bunch of University of Waterloo profs led by Bob Dorney, the fellow who started the garden outside your building. And Bob Dorney was like a pioneer in his time. He was way ahead of everyone. And EcoPlans was the first pure environmental consulting firm in Canada. Between years 3 and 4, I had a great summer job canoeing down wild rivers in Manitoba for the Manitoba Parks Branch. And we were applying something called the Leopold inventory technique that measured uniqueness of rivers and their suitability for inclusion as a provincial park, a wildland river park. So I loved that work, and it made a great senior honors essay for me. And at the end of that year, fourth year, I was hoping to get hired by EcoPlans or by Parks Canada or another provincial parks agency, but that didn't happen. So enter my friend Ziggy to my right there, or left, whatever it is on your screen. But Ziggy mentioned that the consulting firm he worked for in Iceland had an opening for just an urban planner type person, and invited me to come up there. So in May of 1973, that's where I went. And I spent a year up there and doing sort of urban planning type things. And I really enjoyed the country and the work sort of, but I was not an urban planner by nature, and I'm not sure how good my work was, but anyway, I managed to get paid. I didn't get fired, but my true love was environmental or parks planning, and I came back in May of 1974. I returned to my parents' place in Toronto to pursue my environmental planning career. The next day, by complete fluke, Ecoplans called my parents' house looking for me because they finally had enough work to hire a second person. So I happened to answer the phone, and I when they asked me the question, I said hell yes, and I drove down to Waterloo the next day and never looked back. Um, so that's just kind of one of the flukes that happens in your career. And I guess you just have to be ready for it and jump when the time's right. So I was the second employee hired by EcoPlan. And after a couple of weeks, they even gave me a check. And I was in heaven because I was doing my dream job, and they were actually paying me as well. So I met my future wife in Waterloo later that summer. We bought a house in 1977, got married, and my time, 5 years in Waterloo working for EcoPlans, were fantastic because environmental planning was brand new. There was no environmental laws that said you had to do this. We had to convince people it was a good idea, best practice to do this, and that it made common sense. And we we just everything we did was new. We worked on highways, new towns, airports, lots of land development projects, subdivisions, particularly Erin Mills in Mississauga. Um, and if you're interested in this part of environmental practice, Chinwiki has a link to a book written by Bob Dorney called the Professional Practice of Environmental Management. And he talks about some of the early years of what kind of things we did in Ontario. So if you're interested, follow up with Chinwiki on that. In 1976, I was assigned to prepare the environmental part of an application to the National Energy Board for something called the Hamilton Nanticoke oil pipeline. And that was the second time I was hit by lightning that I realized that I wanted to work on pipelines the rest of my life. And so I prepared the application. I backed up Dr. Dorney at the NEB hearing, and then in the fall of 1977, I worked full time as an environmental inspector on the construction of the pipeline, and that was a real eye opener. I realized how inexperienced and green I was. The construction contractor from Alberta tried to walk all over me because he knew how to build pipelines and I didn't. I eventually recovered enough to get the key environmental things happen that I wanted to happen, which included things like stripping topsoil before digging the trench, narrowing the right of way in woodlots and treed areas so we didn't clear as much bush as we could have, and also minimizing sediment deposited in creeks and rivers was a big issue as well. So when that job finished, I came back to the office to change man, and I realized that any recommendations I made as an environmental planner had to be practical and effective. And by this time, EcoPlans had made a number of new hires, and they all had master's degrees. And I realized that my future prospects might be limited because I only had the undergrad degree. So in the fall of 1978, I took a leave from EcoPlans and went back to University of Waterloo full time to get a master's degree in regional planning and resource development. I finished my master's in a little over a year, and my thesis was entitled Environmental Supervision of Construction. And it was there was a lot of interest in the topic because it was really the first research ever written on it. And I ended up selling about 60 copies of my thesis, and I used it as a springboard to start a branch office of EcoPlans in Calgary in January 1980. Calgary it was booming at that time, and I knew that if I wanted to work on pipelines, I needed to be in Calgary because it was the pipeline capital of Canada. So I uprooted my wife from her family and our little house in Kitchener to move to Calgary, which at that time was a dusty, rough and tumble frontier town of about 500,000 souls, which actually is more than the population of Iceland. But at that time, it was like 500,000 redneck people. Anyway, we loved Calgary. There was a real can-do attitude and an entrepreneurial spirit. My wife had no trouble getting a job as a nurse, and I started making contact with the pipeline company. In June of 1981, I started a small consulting firm. I left EcoPlans and started another small firm with a fellow employee. And about 6 months later, the federal government brought in something called the National Energy Program that was basically a privatization of all the oil companies led by the father of our current prime minister, whose name I won't pronounce, but he was not a very popular guy in Calgary because business in Calgary literally ground to a halt overnight because it was built as a city of entrepreneurs and people taking risks. And now all of a sudden, the feds had bigfooted their way into the industry. So investment just dried up overnight. At any rate, somehow we managed to survive doing small jobs. And it was fortunate that both our wives were working full time, and we hadn't started families yet. At any rate, we started slowly starting getting more business. By 1984, we had enough work to hire an employee. And then later that year, my wife and I had a baby girl and then a baby boy in 1986. And that as a consultant, someone who's working for yourself, there's nothing that focuses your need to find work more than providing for a family. So my partner later that year took a full-time job with a pipeline company, and that left me alone in work. And I struggled for a while, and then eventually joined with another gentleman in a company that he had. That company was called Terra Environmental Consultant, and that's when things really started to take off. And I'll probably the rest of my talk, I'll talk about Terra as much as myself because that was the business that became um, the thing that made me what I am today. So we started getting bigger and bigger projects and added power lines, fiber optic lines to our portfolio. And essentially we became linear project specialists. And as an environmental planner, linear projects were great for me because I was a generalist. I knew a little bit about everything. And a linear facility, it think of it as a long, skinny transect cutting across every type of ecoregion and land use you can imagine, right from the Arctic tundra to the boreal forest to the across mountains, across prairies, farms, urban areas, creeks, rivers, steep slopes, wetlands, archaeological and paleontological sites, you name it. So I was a generalist, but I specialized in one type of project, and we did very, very well at that. Terra finally, environmental assessment legislation came in the late 1970s, so companies had to file environmental applications. Chinweeki's putting up a document that actually shows you what a pipeline looks like. Obviously, it's a long straight line. In this case, it's cutting across farmland, and you can see that they stripped the topsoil off the right of way, and they're going to weld that pipeline together. So these pipelines can go for miles and miles, or kilometers and kilometers, sorry. And at any rate, we started working mostly in the prairies, but we also I became involved in a gas pipeline to Wyoming, which led to more American work across several Western states. And I spent most of my time from about 1989 to 1996 working on projects in the U.S. And you can see on our screen, Chinweeki, there's a black thing in the middle of it, but I don't know if you can get rid of that, or if not, it doesn't matter. But oh yeah, there, that's good. Thanks very much. And this is just kind of shows you where most of Terra's projects were located. Most of them were in Alberta, but some in BC and Saskatchewan, and then some up north, and then there's some down south. And one particular one I'll talk about, there's that blue dashed line that starts in northeast BC. That's right there, and it runs diagonally through Alberta, through southeastern Saskatchewan. That's called the Alliance Pipeline, and that was one of the big projects for us. So that's okay, Chinweeki, you can stop sharing that now. So at any rate, Chinweeki mentioned this environmental course, this course on environmental inspection that we started, and we started getting Americans coming to the course. We were then asked to give the course in Washington, D.C., and that led to a program where we gave the course in 10 different American cities, and that was all attributable to my master's degree. At any rate, when by 2014, when Terra was sold, we'd completed more than 10,000 projects. We had a complement of 20 partners, over 450 staff, and a wide range of services. working out of 4 offices in Western Canada. And I think the Chinwiki described my accomplishments on my bio, but I guess one of the neatest things I ever had was the opportunity to see some beautiful country. I traveled by doing pipeline reconnaissance through 6 provinces, 2 territories, 10 states. We went by helicopter, truck, ship, boat, train, skidoo, whatever. Doing sometimes taking helicopters from one trip went from Burbank, California to Holland, Montana, things like that. So we saw some fabulous country, and we met some fantastic people. A lot of it is about relationships, and my partner in Planning 200 is still my best friend, lives a kilometer from me. My classmate Ziggy, you see there, he and I are still very good friends. My thesis advisor, I still talk to him. So at any rate, that's yeah, I've been fortunate to work with some great people. So that's the end of my story. And I guess I've got a little bit that follows, which is advice on finding work and excelling at work. So Chiniki, if you wouldn't mind putting that up. And I'll just go through this quickly because I see I'm talking longer. So for finding work after graduation, follow your gut and take a job that you, if you're getting good experience, don't worry about the money. The money will come later. You need to work with family and friends to find opportunities and individuals in organizations so you can try and get a face-to-face interview. Volunteer for organizations that might put you in contact with those people or that look good on your resume. And if you do find someone like that, pester them without being a pain. Show them that you're interested and that they'll think of you first if an opening comes up. At your interview, show them that you're bright, eager, keen, capable, respectful, humble, but quietly confident, and don't come across as cocky. Look the interviewer in the eye and tell them you're available to work immediately. A resume that shows you've always worked at summer jobs and volunteered at things looks better than one with a blank work history. And don't be afraid to list menial work. Anything's better than nothing. And at Terra, we specifically looked for farm kids because they had common sense and a great work ethic. And don't forget, you only need one job for yourself. Don't be distracted by new fields that look sexy but require more education to get there. Your undergrad degree will be sufficient to get you started. And don't overthink things. Whichever fork in the road you choose, you'll succeed at. So sometimes you can struggle with a decision when you should just make a decision and go with it. You'll be fine either way. So once you get work, how to excel at work. All work happens in a team environment, so you need to impress every member of that team, especially the project managers who you want them to name you on their next project. Really important to do what you say. Don't promise a deliverable if you can't deliver it. Under promise and over deliver and show that you're dependable and reliable. Third bullet, work your ass off. All professional planning work involves deadlines, and you have to work overtime nights and weekends to meet those deadlines. And especially when you're starting out, you need to do that. And then just talk to your boss and get time off afterward. It's important for your professional development to attend conferences and write papers. Um, that's important to raise your profile. Another item is planners will always work with other disciplines like engineers, geologists, environmental people, whatever. And it's important to understand those people, where they're coming from and what's important to them, so that you can uh, improve your credibility and also get you more respect in your organization. Work at one project until you're highly confident, but then ask for another assignment. And you don't get pigeonholed, but keep challenging yourself to do bigger and different projects. And the last item, work hard, play hard, and have fun. So uh, thanks for your patience. I guess we should go ahead. If there's any questions, then feel free to ask whatever you like. There's no dumb questions.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that, Dean. That was really great. I kept like making so many notes. And I had some questions to start us off, and then if anyone else has questions, they can join. You can pop them in the chat or come off mute and ask your questions. But you had attributed some of your really cool um, goals and your successes to your master's degree that you went to get. Um, and you talked a little bit about what pushed you to get the master's degree. But for folks who have their undergrad degree and you're wanting to get into the job field, when is the right time, or what would you say it's a good idea to get? When is it a good idea to pursue further education?
Um, well, you can see, I guess, if you're motivated, and I guess if you can get funding, you can afford it. I guess you can go straight to a master's. In my case, um, it really helped me to have 5 or 6 years of work experience, because well, two things. One is it focused me exactly on what I wanted to do in my master's, and I had the discipline and job skills uh, to do it all in just over a year. So, um, uh, I but I would encourage people, um, get out there and test the job market. And, don't just hopefully you can find something that's up your alley. In my case, I went to Iceland. Um, I did the work and I learned stuff, but I knew I needed to get back to my first love. But um, it was time well spent. Um, so I'm not sure if that answers your question very well.
It totally does. I think that that's part of it, right? Like some people are not sure whether they want to work first before pursuing a master's, or they're like, let me just get all my education out of the way before I start working. And that can be very hard for people to figure out how to navigate. So even to your point of, if you have the funding available to you and you want to then pursue a master's, if that's something that makes sense, go ahead and do that. But if, for example, you go in, you work a little bit, and then you really hone in on that skill set that maybe you're missing in the field, or you want to return to your first love and wanting to bulk up your credentials so that you're able to do that and excel, go for it then too. But always have a taste of something that you're passionate about, it sounds like to me. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, I think if you know what you want to do, and like I was fortunate to be one of those people that, from second year on, I knew what I wanted to do. Then, yeah, I didn't need a master's to do that,
Yeah.
but the master's definitely, improved my chances later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. We have a question in the chat here from Wasala. It says, what is it that kept you going on with your passion for environment during the downtime of the 1980s? Why didn't you just look for another job?
Um, well, nobody was hiring,
Yeah.
uh, in the oil companies in Calgary. And as I mentioned, my wife and I had started a family, so uh, putting food on the table is a pretty, what do they say? Poverty is the best motivator.
Yeah, yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard that one.
Um, you, I was a pretty shy person, and for me to pick up the phone and make cold calls to sales calls to
Yeah.
people, is something I just, hated doing. But uh, it was do that or starve kind of thing. So um, yeah, so I think you know there was really no option. It was find work or starve kind of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for the question. Um, Another question that I think I would like to ask you, just with regards to some of the things that you already covered, is what was it like for you? You talked about the entrepreneurial spirit that it took for you to start your company before joining Terra. How did you develop that skill? Is that something that you recommend that people develop while they're in school, or a mindset that you would recommend for success?
I think Ziggy and I don't know if you keep photographs of different grad classes somewhere, but if you looked at the Planning 73 class photo, I'd be the last person that you would think would be an entrepreneur. Um, it just, but I think it's, as a kid growing up, I had a paper route. My brother and I always did side jobs, cutting grass, shoveling
Hmm.
snow, that kind of thing. Um, I'm not sure if that's the entrepreneurial spirit, but I guess part of it is that I never got a job. I think if Parks Canada had hired me, I probably would have spent my
Mm.
entire career working at Parks Canada and been happy for it. But that didn't happen, and so eventually, like I said, you gotta put food on the table. So you you just I kind of fell into it is what happened.
Yeah,
But through through the EcoPlans connection, because they introduced me to environmental consulting.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, thank you for that. What was your biggest lesson from your experience as an entrepreneur?
My experiences with, sorry,
What was your biggest lesson from your experience as an entrepreneur?
um, ooh,
Ooh.
you, um,
You can take
yeah,
your
I
time with
guess,
that
I
one.
guess you basically for the first 20 years, you basically have to just work your ass
Mm,
off. You, I probably routinely did 10 or 15 all-nighters a year, um, you know, up until I guess I've been in business more than 20 years, because there's no one else around to do it. And if you don't, you're not going to meet deadlines. And it's important that you have a reputation for
mm.
meeting deadlines. So I guess willingness to make that commitment um, is probably a major one for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's good. Your willingness. When there's a will, there's a way, they say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we have approximately 15-ish minutes to the end of our session here. If there's any other questions for Dean, feel free to put them in the chat. Um, Otherwise, we have some other office hours that always happen over the course of the term. This session has been recorded and will be made available to everyone who's registered but unable to make it, but also everyone who's able registered and attended. So thank you for being here. You'll be able to share it with colleagues if they'll find if people ask for it, or if you're sharing with someone and you're like, oh, I wish I was there, you can send this to them. So we'll make that available for folks later on as well. Oh, hi, Emma. I don't know if you intended to come on camera. I
I
just,
did. I
okay.
wanted to ask a question, but first of all, thank you for the talk, Dean. I'm currently in a phase where I decided to leave the job that I was at, just kind of step back, reassess my career, and figure out which path I want to go. I'm finishing up my part-time master's in June. I was looking into possibly getting into consulting or planning, environmental planning, of course. And uh, so I'm looking to just absorb as much information as I can because I'm having a hard time narrowing down where exactly I want to be. I think you're very lucky that you knew where you wanted to be. So my question is kind of related to that. So you had started off in the oil industry and looking at pipelines going in. I do wonder what your thoughts are on the current environment of environmental planning and sustainability and all that. Where you think is a good pathway to go if you're trying to get into planning. Oil pipelines are still happening, obviously, but it's something I think people are trying to push away from. So I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts about that in the current industry.
Yeah, I mean, if I was trying to do now what I did then, I'd be starving. Because there are no more big pipelines in Canada. That's over. Um, and I do recognize the issues with back then we didn't worry about things like climate change and that kind of stuff. That these things, which the pipelines have a life of 50 years or more, right? So I recognize now particularly in this climate, that's not a good thing. Having said that, we our company or our country's made a big mistake by turning back on natural gas as a bridge fuel. We should have been shipping LNG off the BC coast 10 years ago. We've got tons of natural gas. Asia needs natural gas. We as a country, we stupidly restricted ourselves on that market. And the Americans just within 10 years, they became the biggest LNG producer in the world. And that could have been the market in Canada. All that gross domestic product could have been in Canada. So at any rate, I I realize that it's not very popular to say things like that. But anyway, now, yeah, don't get into pipelines, that's for sure. But um, power lines are still important. That's uh, uh, power has to be it's generated in places. It has to be transported to places. Direct current, DC, high voltage DC power lines is a big thing that's necessary in the future. Um, Obviously, renewable energy, um, uh, wind and solar, um, all the hydro. Canada's developed all the hydro we can. We don't Site C in BC is just going on stream right now. That's really the last big hydro project you'll see. So, wind and solar and other things like that, I guess definitely get into that. I don't know if uh, Chinwiki, if we can do this, but I'm happy to correspond with Emma offline. If you can put us in touch, I could. I'm not sure where you're located, but I could give you some ideas about, if you're interested in different consulting firms and stuff like that, I could give you ideas about that. What kind of work were you doing before that you?
So I was working for a nonprofit in Waterloo, um, Sustainable Waterloo region, mostly in events and community engagement. So I'm looking to kind of move away from the nonprofit world, especially with getting this degree.
Yeah, well, we probably had a 10-person stakeholder engagement group at Terra,
Mm,
and but those are in the days when you could actually talk to people face to face and organize open houses and meetings, and you wouldn't get drummed out of town. Um, we also had a group of over 30 people doing traditional knowledge work with Indigenous communities, um, uh, which was very important, particularly on projects in British Columbia. Um, but uh, I mean, if you want to stay in stakeholder engagement, there's that kind of stuff. But it's all, as we see, it's all done by Zoom and things like that now. So yeah, that's way beyond me.
yeah. No, that's great. Stakeholder engagement is one that I've definitely been thinking about. There's the course right now for MEB that I'm taking is stakeholder engagement, and it's really interesting for me. So that's actually, yeah, and I'd love to connect offline, absolutely. It'd be amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great.
And I am happy to facilitate that connection. It's always my pleasure. I think Dean has given this permission, but like in general, Dean's email will be available to everyone after the
Sure.
session if you want to reach out to him. Dean's like, sure. Great. Awesome. Um, yeah. And the document that I shared earlier that says advice to UW, that will also be made available to folks who would like to just like if you're talking to anyone or if you yourself want reminders on some excellent insight from Dean in like a nice bulleted format, you have access to that as well. But that was an excellent question, Emma. Yeah, thank you for asking that. Stakeholder engagement sounds really interesting. I'm taking a course right now that has a little bit of that. So it'd be really interesting to take a course that looks at stakeholder engagement holistically. So thank you for plugging that. And, Dean, I agree with you. In-person events used to be such a big thing, and then the pandemic happened, and now no one wants to leave their house. So what do we do about that? But the hope is that we continue to facilitate spaces and events where people are able to connect in person and make connections like these so that we can mobilize people and get things done, right? Have the right people in the right field doing the right work.
Yeah, yeah. It used to be an occupational hazard drinking all that coffee and eating all those donuts.
Yeah.
Open.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for that question, Emma. And thanks for your response, Dean. Okay. With 5 minutes to spare, I'm happy to, yeah, officially bring the session to a close. Thank you, Dean, again for sharing your knowledge